afternoon, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about customer loyalty in banking, from detractors to promoters in 6 months. My name is Natasha Safronova. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at SoGoSurvey. And today I'll be moderating this session, and our speaker is Haris Azmi. He is Chief Revenue Officer. He's been with SoGoSurvey for actually over 10 years and even longer experience working in SaaS space and in financial industry and helping customers to implement those programs to improve customer experience at their end. Hello, Haris.
Hello, Natasha, and thank you so much for that introduction. And hello to the audience. I'm really excited to talk about this topic.
I do have a question for you, Haris. So like this topic, how to convert detractors to promoters. I 100% understand that's, very, very common use case. And that's something that keeps many of us up at night. But also when you Google detractors to promoters, there are so many search results out there. They all talk about be nice, listen, be empathetic. So why this topic? And are we going to talk today about something different than that?
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of content out there on similar topic or maybe on this topic itself. But it was kind of a little disappointing to see that majority of that content focuses on something very obvious, especially for this audience that we have today for this webinar. I'm sure that everybody knows that we have to be, we have to respond quickly to customers' questions. We have to be empathetic. We need to, be nice to them. I mean, those things are given and granted. So I'm going to assume that, everybody who's here for this webinar is doing all of that and much more. But despite that fact, they want to see results slightly better than what they're seeing when it comes to customer retention and, business growth. And so we really are going to take our almost 18 years of experience in working with literally over 2,000 customers that we have, and what we have learned from them and engaging with them. And personally, I've been, like you said, for 10 years, I've had a very close range view into working with many banks, especially in the last 7-8 years, I would say, in helping them understand their customers, their members, and then setting up a program that is long lasting, right? That is proven to yield results year after year. And that is what we have brought to today's webinar. Hopefully that is going to be helpful to our audience today.
Fantastic. Before I let you jump into those 5-step methodology, let's just make sure that we are all on the same page when we are using terms such as detractors and promoters. So like really quick on this screen, something that's you probably all are familiar with, but again, just to make sure, detractors, promoters, this terminology comes from the NPS methodology to measure customer loyalty. Net Promoter Score, or NPS, is normally measured by asking type of question: how likely are you to recommend us, a company, a product, a service, to a friend or a colleague? It's a scale from 0 to 10. You could see from 0 to 6. Those customers are considered detractors, and then 7 and 8 are passives, and promoters are 9 to 10. So you could see the formula for NPS here. And just to dive a little bit into those characteristics of these 3 types of customers. Who are they? Who are detractors, passives, and promoters? So detractors, the largest number of those points on a scale. They are unsatisfied customers. Something went wrong with their experience, something is not up to their expectations, and they're very likely to churn or leave you soon. The catch there here is that detractors usually speak louder than promoters. And so this is why we really need to focus on those detractors. And this is why I'm very much willing to hear what Haris has to say about the 5-step methodology that works so well for our clients. But also a question here for you, Haris. Is it possible for a business to have no detractors at all?
If there's a business that has no customers, yeah, but that really truly won't be a business, right? So I don't think we're here to basically share what will completely eliminate detractors, right? I mean, everybody understands that's not possible. I think to a very large extent, what we are here to do is, first of all, figure out how do we, first of all, end up making detractors, right? What are the behavior that turns our customers? Because ultimately, whether they're detractors, passives, or promoters, they're our customers. We just, categorize them into different buckets to help better understand their behavior and their sentiments towards our brand and products. But ultimately, if we can understand that and then figure out a way to completely eliminate doing things that lead to creation of detractors, look, we would have solved a big problem right there. And what you may end up doing is that a small group of customers that you have that are detractors, then how do we handle that smaller group? So I think one of the things that I want to talk about, this is getting into our 5 methodology, the steps that we have. And this is something that is probably unique to in implementing this approach towards managing customer experience, especially, we'll bring some examples of banking, but, some of the examples that I have drawn, the experiences I've drawn are from healthcare industries and many other industries. And triage, for that example, is a term that is used in the healthcare industry, right? I mean, if I have to define it, triage, I think the way it is defined is that is the assignment of degrees or sense of urgency when you're dealing with a large number of patients and you're prioritizing their treatment depending on the wounds and illness that they have. So, because healthcare, hospitals, they're dealing with life and death situations. So it definitely behooves, it makes sense for them to have a very well-defined protocol in dealing with such a situation. But then here's the thing, right? If you look at detractors and the kind of damage and the wound that they can cause to our business, I think it is not, wrong on our part to start to look at support from that triage point of view. And so if you're wondering, how do you triage a support within banking? And I think that is an example. There are a couple of examples that I want to give you. They're more like hints that will help you. And I'm sure there are a lot of organizations that do this already. But if you're wondering how you can take advantage of and what are the benefits of triaging support and what exactly we mean by that, I think will become very clear with the example that we have. So I'm going to take 2 scenarios. So scenario number 1 is the very obvious, very often, of course, if you have a business, you have customers would need help, right? So play down all these different scenarios that your customers would go through in interacting with you along the different, along different touch points along the journey of the customer. But then the very basic thing, if I have a question, right? I got my first mortgage bill and I am not sure I understand everything that's on it. And I have a question, how quickly can I get that? I want to apply for a car loan and I have a question, how can I? And again, this is a potential customer as opposed to a customer in the first example. But anyway, they have questions, how quickly can you address their problem, right? And that's an exercise that you do. And then as you go through this path of analyzing different situations that your customers would go through, right? So the first thing is that, okay, great, if you can address their problem quickly, wonderful, but what happens when a problem cannot be resolved, or it takes a very long time to get resolved, right? What do you do? Are your staff members trained to handle those situations? And then how many customers have an unresolved issue? Like as the head of a customer support or call center, there are certain core key metrics that you're tracking. Like, do you know how many customers today have an unresolved issue that is beyond the SLA that you aspire for? Right? And what is the average resolution time, right? If somebody wants to find out mortgage rate today and sends an email, how long does it take for the support staff to respond to that email, right? Does it take a few minutes to a few hours a day? And depending on that, you can have very different outcomes in terms of number of customers that you have, right? Every minute matters in certain cases. And then as you're walking through these different paths and questions, you start to move towards the extreme cases, right? The edge issues that I'm calling them. You start to ask, what will frustrate customers? Like what certain behavior, what kind of questions they have if not answered timely would leave them with a very unpleasant experience, right? So doing this exercise, and clearly this is by no means a comprehensive, but hopefully hint in actually understanding what your customers go through when they need help. is a very good exercise for you to understand when you're putting yourself in your customer's shoes. Especially in the banking industry, there are special review sites that focus on banks, right? Whether it's a Wallet Hub or any of those review sites, people are writing about your business, their experiences. So the question is, when a customer or a member writes a negative review about your business, how do you discover that negative review today? Like, is it something that you come across by chance because you're Googling and you're like, wow? Or is it something a friend or a colleague forwarded to you, say, hey, you might find this interesting or important? Or is there a process in place? Like, there are some good CX platforms that alert you. They keep track of every mention of your brand, of your name, positive, negative, neutral, and will alert you. And in some good cases, some of those CX platforms, they will even respond. They will send a quick acknowledgement that, hey, we have heard you, and that somebody will respond to you. And then once you have that discovery process about negative reviews in place, then the next question to ask is that, do you have a good plan in place to address those negative reviews? Many platforms where they allow a consumer or a customer to write reviews about the experience, they also allow the businesses to respond to those reviews, whether positive or negative. And you will be surprised that many of them are completely unresponded. So you leave the narrative in the hands of detractors, let's say in this case, when we're talking about a negative review, right? Where the platform allows you to have a seat at that table and engage in a nice conversation with those detractors. Ultimately, they are customers, and turn around that situation. So there is a need for you to take control and charge of your online reputation, and to be aware of whether it's going up or down. And again, this is not the time and place for us to get into the details of how you manage online reputation and how do you keep track of those, but a good CX platform will allow you to do that.
And that is just, Harris, really to add here, it is so important to do that. Just again, as a consumer, I'm that type of consumer who does online research all the time. And if it's something like going to the restaurant, I'd probably just look at the overall rating. I'm like, okay, this, looks good. 4.5 stars, I'll go. But if it's a decision such as like choosing a bank where to open the next account, this is more like a long-term relationship I'm entering, right? So I do want to make sure that I'll be getting support and help when needed if something happens. So when I do the research, I actually focus on those negative reviews, and I gotta say it could like make or break it for me if there are responses, because even if it's this response, just really to acknowledge that this is a problem and yes, we are looking into this, it just means that somebody heard it, somebody cared. Like this organization, they take customer support seriously. Because I also feel like from your first scenario to your second scenario, there is something happened in between, right? Because the first need that customers would have, or like the immediate need is, I need help. Not like, oh my God, I want to go complain like everywhere. I'm really trying to get my problem solved and I'm trying to get a support. And then if that doesn't happen, then there could be more of this negative sentiment. But I'm really, glad that you touched both of this. But I'm now wondering, so you said edge cases. So yeah, let's go straight into it. What are the edge cases?
Before we get to the edge cases, I think something that you mentioned that I definitely would like to emphasize on is that usually those negative reviews are not people talking that they had a question when they were using your product, right? Usually those negative reviews are about the experience when they needed help using your product and services. So I think there is that distinction, right? People will have questions about your product and services, how that experience is handled when in delivering that support. And I think that distinction is also, is understood, but it's not out of place to emphasize. So you're right. I mean, we just looked at two different scenarios. Organizations may have 15, 16, 20 different scenarios, depending on the size of the organization, the complexity of the organization, different products and services that you offer, in how many regions, and whether it's a national or international brand. So different things come into play. But then if you do this exercise and, when we said that as you move along, you start to get into these edge issues, these extreme cases. And then what this exercise does is that at least it helps you to analyze and understand what are those extreme cases, right? So that you start to look for those signals, for those patterns, and for your staff to be trained and to recognize that we're now moving into the danger zone, and that we need to now, look into a book or a guide that will help us address, customers that are moving in that area. And one of the examples that I want to give here is that, and this is something that I listened to Charlie Munger, a person who requires no introduction with this group, but just for the record, he's the vice chairman and a long-term partner of Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway. He talks about his experience when he was a young lieutenant in the United States Army during World War II. And he used to send these weather data back to the fighter pilots. And he said that when he took this job, and you can imagine a young man, having this responsibility, and he recognized that his data, his information can make a difference between life and death. And so this is the way he put it, and I'm saying it literally in his words, where he said on that interview is that, I asked myself, how can I kill these pilots? And he said, I started writing down everything that I can do that would for sure lead to their death. And he said, I made sure every day that I never do those things. In his case, he said there were two things. He said, I made sure that I never do those two things that will lead to their death or a casualty. And so, edge issues also, because when you look at edge issues, and if you go to the next slide, I think, there are two things that I'm leaving you here with. One is, you ask this question, what would drive your customers mad, right? And luckily, we're fortunate we're not dealing with life and death issues. But there are things that drive customers mad. So that list will definitely be a lot shorter than if you were to ask what would wow the customers. And, that's a separate webinar topic in itself within banking. But then when you start to make this list and you have your staff team trained at the call center, that, you start to recognize these patterns, and then you have a plan in place to actually address such customers, definitely would go a long way in better dealing with them, whether you need to empathize with them, whether you need to escalate at that point, whether you need to do X, Y, Z. It definitely would be, those customers would be better served if you have already discussed scenarios that may likely come up as a result of that exercise.
Great. So Harris, with this, we started talking about NPS, detractors, promoters, and then like all this, like key factors, behavior, different scenarios. How does this all connect together? Like with what kind of metrics? Is this NPS alone? Is this NPS with any combination with other metrics? Is this something behind the metrics? So let's talk about the key CX metrics and how to identify them and how to use them so we could track the success.
Sure. See, here's the thing, right? I mean, NPS is just one of those metrics. Is not the only metrics when it comes to understanding customer sentiment. There's CSAT, there's effort score. There are many other. Then there's also the employees play a huge role in customer experience. At the same time, for us to understand, if you take two organizations, two banks that have exactly identical NPS score, right? Let's say 50. That does not mean the issues that exist in Bank 1 are exactly identical to issues in Bank 2 because, hey, they happen to have exactly same NPS score. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that the drivers, the parameters that drive up or down those NPS scores are very different in different organizations, right? And so while NPS is easy, simple to understand, gives you a quick overall picture of how things are, it does not tell you quickly what are those factors driving those scores. A good CX platform will allow you to bring your own metric into the play, not just NPS and CSAT or effort score, but something that is very, very custom to your organization. And that allows you then to have a quick oversight into those metrics so you know exactly. And then not just these core metrics, then there are sub-metrics within each one of those, right? For an organization, time to respond, average wait time when somebody calls into a call center, or the wait time at a branch when people get to a branch for any transaction. different things drive this different sentiments towards your brand, towards your product and services, the level of satisfaction. Those things need to be measured, because once you start to collect data across the board, is when you start to really enjoy fixing what's working, what's not working, which we will talk in our subsequent slides.
So Harris, I believe you had a good example in mind that might be like really good to share here, is about that one credit union customer that we have who were like measuring all these metrics, and what they realized is that their mobile experience is not performing that well. So how did they get into the whys and like the why of what was happening, right, and how did they fix it?
No, that's a good point. And I think so. We have one of our credit union clients they're based in North Carolina. And this is again, 4 or 5 years ago. This is interesting. I was directly involved with that project. I was talking to the CEO of the bank. And this is what exactly happened. She had recently launched mobile banking, completely revamped. And she wanted the adoption to be higher. But then, surprisingly, the adoption was lower than what she anticipated. 6 months had passed by, and she wanted to understand why is that, despite all the promotions she has made, it's not getting adopted to the extent that she expected. And lo and behold, going back to some of the examples I was giving it, right? I mean, and understanding NPS is one thing, but what impacts NPS is also very important. Turns out that while the mobile banking, after it was refreshed, and of course, a lot of security has gone into building and making, of course, web banking, mobile banking secure. There was this perception amongst the members of this credit union that led to a little bit of, I want to say, question mark on the security of the web banking in general, and particularly maybe with this credit union. And this was surprising. But then when they dug in a little bit more, what is driving that sentiment? What is driving that belief? And it turns out that while they had a great mobile banking and web banking, but their website in itself was a little outdated. The experience that, a modern current time customers have when they go to a bank, that website, which was designed some time back, had not been refreshed. Turns out that was driving that sentiment as well. And once that was discovered, it was an easier problem to fix. So it was really, they went ahead and did an exercise of refreshing the website that definitely helped in adopting the mobile banking, because it really helped dispel this idea that this is an outdated website, so maybe an outdated web banking, mobile banking. There was a correlation between the two, which was in the blind spot of the leadership. So I think, this was it. I'm glad you reminded me. Yeah, this is a great example to share.
Perfect. And I also feel that it connects really nicely into our next section. Go after quick wins, right?
Yes. So once you have set up, that exercise that we talked about, right? The first one, which is triaging support, and the second one is dealing with the edge issues. And then the third one that we just talked about, these three primarily focus on eliminating creation of detractors, right? They will lower down, minimize the number of detractors if you're doing all of that exercise and putting, a plan in place. But at the same time, your different data that you're collecting at different touch points will also start to yield insight into what we may consider as low-hanging fruits. Now, low-hanging fruits, some of the things that you will learn through this exercise of customer experience platform implementation, or you may have already gone through this exercise, is that you will see that some of the results are obvious. You're like, oh yes, this is not surprising for me. We have this sense that this is something that we need to improve upon. But then you will also come across certain use cases or certain scenarios which may again be in your blind spot. And that is, again, very important for the organization to first tackle the low-hanging fruits. And there are two reasons for that, right? Usually, these are issues that can be handled by the client services customer support department itself, right? And they have a direct and quick impact on customer satisfaction, NPS score, helping you provide better experience, turning your detractors into promoters, so on and so forth. So, which is why, while yes, we want to implement and we want to transform our customer experience, but just realize that it's not going to happen overnight, right? So start with the quick wins and then start to go towards, let your quick wins feed some of the early wins, and then tackle some of the mid-level, then go to the issues that probably will take a longer time to implement. And again, Natasha, before we move on to the next slide, I want to share an experience here. This is again with a bank in Florida. This is an exercise that they did when they were looking at the data and when they implemented the CX platform within the organization. Their teller were trained, the employees were trained to engage with customers, right? I mean, everybody wants to have nice, you welcome them, there are certain scripts that you say, the pleasantries you exchange. The idea was that, you know, let's make it a little bit of more lively chit-chat environment that really will make the customers feel a little better. And again, what that happened as a result when they started looking at the data broken down by regions, broken down by different branches, they realized that some of the regions and branches where they had implemented this new strategy, the NPS score has started to go down, like very contrary to what they expected otherwise, right? And then when they started to dig deeper into the data, why is that? They realized that when that thing was implemented, it increased the wait time of the customers in the branch, right? And turns out that the wait time has a more direct correlation with NPS, with satisfaction, at least in this case that we're talking about, than the overall, you know, having an extended pleasantry. And again, by extended, could be a minute or 3 minutes or whatever the case may be, depending on the transactions. So the team had to be retrained. Well, you know, yes, welcoming and pleasantries are important, but being aware of this fact that wait time is such a critical driver or parameter in influencing NPS, that they started to prioritize that over other things. So again, another great example, something that you may implement thinking this will help your NPS, but may actually backfire. So it is very important to keep looking at the data as you start to implement and see what is the impact of that. And finally, I think as a part of that 5-step methodology that we want to talk about is addressing your global issues. And the question is, what is a global issue? When I defined low-hanging fruits, quick wins, those were, I want to say, local issues that can be fixed by the customer support department. So global issues, just by nature, is something that requires the presence and the involvement of all the other departments, right? Number one. But more importantly, it may require the attention of the top-level executives or even the board members. So for example, if it turns out that there is a lot of complaint or you're losing business because of, let's say, the rates that you're providing, mortgage rates, car loan rates, they're not as competitive as some of your other local competitors in your region, there's very little that support can do. So this requires escalation all the way to the top. It requires, your appetite for risk and things like that. So larger discussion, but clearly, a CX platform will not only help you understand your local issues, your quick wins, things that you may be aware of, but then also issues that will bubble up as a result of the data that you're collecting from your customers that will start to throw lights that may be, fundamental to your business, but they need to be addressed. So escalating those issues to the higher level within the organization so that you can resolve them is also going to be a very important factor in managing, customers' experience, and then at the end, providing better experience overall. So yes, I think this is probably my favorite slide of this webinar because it kind of summarizes most of what we have talked about today. And really, if you can take this and share this internally with within your organization to your colleagues, if you find this useful, I think this may be the slide to do. And again, I don't want to repeat everything. But one of the things I definitely want to mention is that improving customer journey is not a linear process, right? In many cases, what will happen is that you will see the first round of initiatives that you're putting in will not deliver the desired satisfaction levels. So what that means is that moving from good to great will require regularly going back to the drawing board and keeping your patience and, and always fighting for your customers. Let's put it this way. You're always out there fighting for your customers. What else can you do that will improve the experience of your customers? And which is why this is cyclical. So whether you have to do once a year, twice a year, whether you do every quarter, you may want to do more frequently early on, then reduce the frequency as you become more and more, things get implemented and the issues start to subside. But this is definitely something that needs to be implemented as a part of the business process in order to have a better control over your customer experience.
Wonderful. And I also I know that when we discuss this methodology, it's not a one size fits all, and it's really important to see it in context. So we've been in the past having questions on how can we see this in action. So we've come up with this offer here that Harris, I'm sure you want to talk about.
Yes, and I think this is the first time we're really putting an offer like this in a webinar, because we have seen that post-webinar, whenever we would talk about this methodology or take a use case of one of our clients and show them how it has really gone from where they were to where they are using these methodology, a lot of them wanted to see that into action, right? It's one thing to talk about it. The other thing is to see it into action. So we wanted to put this thing here. It's completely complimentary. And in fact, it's a link that you can really click on once you get this. And maybe the link is shared with you. And this is, so Ian, who you are going to be scheduled with, is one of our experts who's been with SoGo for almost, I want to say 7+ years now, but has been in the SaaS industry for long. Has been at Dell, who has dealt with data security, so understands a lot of aspects that definitely your customers, your industry, banking industry actually deals with, and definitely has himself worked with many banks and credit unions directly in bringing them on board and helping them with implementing a great CX program. So definitely take advantage of for those who are kind of curious to see something in action.